This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Joining us today is Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources. Thank you for joining us today. Ben, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Mark. Very good. Little frayed around the edges. Hard work over the last few months, but today's announcement, obviously, huge sense of relief finally to get this out there.
Indeed. So, of course, you have announced this proof of concept drill campaign that's been commissioned by Kavango and completed by Richard Hornsey. I wonder if I can ask you, first of all, why did you get this report commissioned and what does it enable you to do corporately and strategically?
So this report is a compilation of all of the exploration data that Kavango has available to it. So that's obviously from all of the programs that we've run, but also other programs that have been run historically. So one of the great things about Botswana is a fantastically well-organized country. They have government core sheds, primarily at Kang, but also in other areas. So you can get access to historic physical drill core, obviously to help sort of guide future exploration. So what we've done is with Richard is we've taken all of the data together, we've provided it to Richard, and we've just asked him for his professional opinion on what it exactly is that we're looking at with this project. Now, it's been a huge piece of work. And in terms of the objectives of this, I've been talking with various parties now for 18 months. I've done a lot of hard yards, sort of opening various doors, giving presentations, and people have certainly been interested in the project, but the response has generally been, yeah, very interesting. Come back to us when you've got something definitive to show us, prove that this system that you're looking at has been through these mineralizing processes so that they could actually contain potential metal ore bodies. And that's really what today's report has done for us. We've now got that evidence. We've actually got much more than the evidence we set out to gain, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But really, for us, what this now will be the centerpiece of our efforts to develop this project commercially.
Okay, so it enables you, I think you said in the RNS, to undertake much more informed discussions with interested parties. So does this mean that you're actively looking to joint venture it, or could this report be used internally for Kavango to further your own exploration, just as a sole operator?
Simple answer is both. So in terms of our own initiatives, obviously, we will keep on moving the project forward under our own steam. I mean, that's obviously our primary objective, because as much as obviously we want to bring a JV partner in until we've actually got something signed and, the money is in the bank, so to speak, obviously we need to keep moving things forward under our own steam. One of the great things about Richard's report is how honest he's been. He's highlighted a number of mistakes, frankly, that we've made over the years. So, for example, we've Forrest Gumped our way to the Proterozoic. That was never an exploration target of ours originally. It was something the company wasn't really that aware of until, of course, we drilled it as part of the proof of concept campaign. We hit those really interesting looking gabbros, those rocks, I should say, the intrusions. And it now turns out that those intrusions that we hit, that we weren't ever looking for in the first place, look like they are a fantastic target for PGEs. Now, that's a big development for Kavango. We've actually hit the right types of rock for PGE mineralization. And thanks to Hillary's work, the magnetic analysis that he's done and the magnetic maps he's created, we've got a roadmap essentially to start exploring the region with this new target in mind. So it's very important for us internally. But in terms of the conversations that we have with potential partners, well, we've now got a 300-page report with there's so much science that's gone into this, so much analysis. We've got all sorts of different charts with different indicators pointing to sort of the different aspects within the systems, I should say, because obviously there are two. There's the Karoo and the Proterozoic. This stuff is very, very complicated. And what we now have is an extremely solid base of work that we can put in front of serious technical people. They can look at, obviously, the work that's been done to date. They can look at what we've proven so far. They can look at the gaps in the program. They can see those and how we're going to fill them. But much more importantly, they can look at what our exploration methods are and how we now plan to unlock this region.
Okay. Just before we move on to just look at some of the highlights of the report in a little bit more detail, I just want to pick up on I've noticed some criticism with regards to how long this report has taken to actually get out to the market. I mean, do you have a response on that?
Yeah, I suppose it's a hard one, Mark. I mean, criticism is part of this job. I'm sort of out front and center, so I'm obviously the one that people will throw bricks and bottles at, metaphorically speaking. I understand it. Our share price is down quite significantly this year. Obviously, the market conditions are pretty awful as well. Some of it clearly is driven by personal agendas, which is pointless, and I don't really understand why people bother do that. But in terms of the sort of the genuine concerns among our shareholders, I do understand them, and I've been saying throughout, look, we've got to be patient with this. This has been a huge piece of work. We are a small company. We've got 3 major projects. That's another point to remember. Our company, we are all working flat out pretty much 24/7 on this business. So it has just taken time. Then, of course, the final piece of the jigsaw was to find somebody of Richard's quality and his technical experience and skills who could actually take everything that we have, bring it all together and provide us with this comprehensive piece of work we have now. The other thing to remember is that while the equity markets have been suffering, we're in a major bull market, in particular for nickel and copper. So people like Richard, we've been incredibly fortunate to bring him on board. I was introduced to him a couple of months ago through a very good personal contact of mine. Basically, we pulled in a bit of a favor to get Richard involved. And he, thankfully, initially his brief was much smaller and it ended up growing and growing and growing the more into the project he got and the more he looked at it. And it just ended up being a much, much bigger piece of work, I think, than we anticipated. But what shareholders can now see with the executive summary is just how much work has gone into this. This is why we've asked for patience. And what I would say is, look at Kavango's track record over the last 18 months since I joined as director. We've delivered operationally everything we said we would do. We've drilled 5,000 meters of diamond core drilling across our projects. And yes, there have been times that, things have taken longer than we might have hoped, but we've stuck at it and we've delivered. And this report for me, I can't tell you how proud I am of our team. I mean, they are just, they're great people. They're talented. They're energetic. They've really put their all into this, and we can see this today.
Okay, excellent. Well, it is certainly a very big report. I can see 26 pages there, so an awful lot of work has gone into that, and yeah, well done for getting that completed with all the additional exploration data that Kavango have indeed drawn up from their exploration plans. Of course, there are 3 reports almost, aren't there? 3 kind of pieces to this whole report: the drill core review, the lithogeochemistry, and the implications for prospectivity of the KSZ. So I wonder, do you want to take us through some of the highlights that perhaps stand out to you, or perhaps that Richard pointed out to you, so that shareholders can perhaps get a sense of how you're all feeling about this report?
So what I'd like to do, Mark, is actually something slightly different. There's a huge amount of information within this. And yeah, of course, I can give all the highlights and talk about, all singing, all dancing, how wonderful the KSZ is. But I think this piece of work, it's actually worth people taking the time to read through it. So what I'd like to do is maybe just guide people a little bit through the document so they can fast track a bit, sort of how they can really get into the guts of this thing and understand what's being put in front of them.
Okay.
One point to mention here is that, Mark, this is only the executive summary. We've got 300 pages. The other main reports are over 300 pages of work that's gone into this. So it really is a very substantial piece of work that sort of underlies this. And the reason that we're keeping that confidential is because obviously Kavango has spent, the best part of $5 million since 2012 exploring the KSZ. So this report is now our IP. It's our intellectual property. So we're not putting the full information out into the public domain, because the exploration leads that we now have, those could prove to be incredibly valuable one day. So we are going to be making it open to potential JV partners, subject to NDA, of course, but the full documents won't make it into public domain. But what this document does, this executive summary, is it provides the key findings. And the first thing I wanted to point out is on page 5, we have this map together with this table. Now, this is important because one of the things that Richard really brought home for us is that there can be an assumption that when you're looking at a magmatic system, you might think that this sort of just happened over sort of one period of time, when in fact, actually, these systems can develop over millions and millions of years in multiple phases. And what Richard has done is he's taken the core data. He went out and did a site visit as well. So he was out in Botswana, boots on the ground, went and actually looked at the individual cores. And he's taken the main holes that have been drilled, both by Kavango and historically by some of the other exploration companies that work there. Now, the TA2 holes and the KSZ DD holes, those were the 4 holes that we drilled in our proof of concept campaign in 21 and to the start of this year. The RIT holes were the holes that Kavango drilled back in 2019. Some really interesting developments around those, not least around RIT 50, which I really want to bring out because we're going to be doing much more work on this. But in terms of the prospectivity of the Karoo itself, it turns out that these quite shallow holes that Kavango drilled back in 2019, these are the most prospective, and that's been completely missed by the company. That's something that we are going to be addressing urgently, because obviously we need to understand sort of how it is that we've missed this as an exploration lead. But what's also quite encouraging is that the way that the system appears to dip out to the west, it appears that this Karoo system might be shallower to surface. So this is going to become a key focus area for us in the coming months. And of course, up in the north, we've got the B conductors. Now, one of the main unanswered questions in all of this is, what are those conductors? We haven't actually intercepted them with the drill bit yet. So what Richard has done for us is he's looked at the overall prospectivity of the system. One of the conclusions is that we haven't yet hit the right rocks, but what all the indications are showing that the system is right to host these types of bodies. And of course, as we know, the conductance levels on these three targets that we're going to be looking to drill either later this year or early next year, depending on the work that happens over the next few months. There aren't many things in nature that are that conductive. So it's quite possible those could be nickel copper sulfide bodies. And the only way we'll find out will be to drill them. But coming back to this report, the thing to note is that what we also have is we've done analysis of the 3 holes that are available to us in KSZ South. Now, one of the questions I've been asked on Twitter today was a very good one. I've been asked about specific assay results, in particular relating to TA2 DD002. Now, this hole, as you may remember, Mark, this was the one where we intercepted 350 meters of the Proterozoic, which Richard calls the Shani complex. Now, those rocks in particular have proven to be extremely interesting because what Richard has done is he's classified the different phases of magmatic events that passed through these systems, both at the Karoo and underneath in the Shani, in the Proterozoic, and he's numbered them. So what I'd recommend is that if you come to read this report, start off on page 5, familiarize yourself with these maps and this table, so that when you see reference, for example, to Shani 1, Shani 2, Shani 3, you'll see where in the system these occur. Now, coming back to this TA2 DD002 hole, what's very interesting about this is that we've got moderate enrichment of platinum group elements. That's a very, very good indicator. Where things get very interesting is in the south, with the 3 holes that he analysed down here, which intercepted the Shani, which he's called Shani 3. The similarity between Shani 2 and Shani 3 geochemically is very, very notable. And what we also have from the rocks down here are elevated PGEs. Now, that is an extremely encouraging lead for us. PGE exploration is much more complicated. It requires different geophysical techniques. So Kavango, part of our work over the coming months will be to do some trials. We've got different surveying equipment that will be available to us. But one of those is, of course, this CSAMT. Now, I'll talk a bit about CSAMT in a moment and how important that is. But the key thing when reading this report is if you understand this map, you grasp this map, you understand the different phases of magma that Richard is talking about, it basically will put the whole thing into context and make it much more, I think, understandable and easier to work through. So it's even, but when I went through this, I actually printed this page off and I kept it sort of alongside the main report so that I could, I was constantly like referring back so I could just see where I was on the map when he was making sort of various conclusions. So I think that's really sort of the key thing I wanted to draw people's attention to today. The other point as well is that throughout the document, there are some things that might be seen as negative. So when he says that we haven't intercepted the right rocks yet, well, we know that because we've not hit economic mineralization. You won't hit the right rocks until you hit the right rocks. The key comment throughout all of this is about the prospectivity of the system and the fact that these magmas have been through what look like the right sort of processes to form these large-scale metal deposits. That's one of the key questions we've always been asked by any potential partner. Have you got this evidence? The mineral systems review that Dr. David Holwell did for us back in 2020, that was much more conceptual. David Holwell is a world expert, really well respected. It's always been great for us to be able to drop his name, but that was a more conceptual study at this stage. What Richard has provided for us today is far more practical and far more comprehensive because he's looked at the entire system. And in particular, he's used obviously the data that we got that was very targeted from our successful drill campaign earlier this year.
Okay, so it looks like a highly prospective area to be exploring for nickel, copper, and now PGEs.
Exactly. So I think, there'll be people who say, oh, well, we already knew that. And of course, that's always been Kavango's pitch, and it's always been the theory. Whenever I give sort of the pitch about the KSZ, I talk about this 450-kilometer long magnetic anomaly that, it's got the Norilsk scanner log. The theory always was that we would have this type of system. But it was a theory. It was a theory with a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing in that way and a lot of the work that had been done. But I think even Kavango, I don't think we'd yet fully grasped the data that we had at our disposal, because we had a huge amount of data right at our fingertips. Bringing someone like Richard in, who knows how to bring that data together and to analyze it and to present it, we've moved from this just being conceptual at this stage to we've got actual physical evidence that both the Shani, the Proterozoic deep at greater depth, and of course our primary Karoo targets that we originally went for, they've been all of them through these processes that have seen metal stripping occurring, this sulfur saturation has occurred, which would suggest that these deposits are actually out there. So we've moved from sort of exploration theory much more towards sort of down the path, hopefully ultimately towards discovery.
Okay, so you'd recommend that investors read through this 26-page executive summary to really help them understand exactly what you and the team are feeling is the opportunity at the KSZ.
I think if you want to invest into Kavango, this will be time well spent. Obviously, I think in terms of where our stock is and in terms of where we are in the market, I think we're brilliantly positioned for a recovery. Most people will trade, well, not most actually, a lot of people will trade Kavango on the basis, when we drill, and they'll take a gamble on us having the right result. But I think if you really want to sort of get behind this business and understand the exploration methodology that we're pursuing, what the targets are, and also what the risks are as well. So, Richard does describe in here the risks, and in particular, we've got a huge area of ground. So if you look at it from plan view, we've got, 8,800 square kilometers. That's a lot of ground to cover. And it's also unclear at what depth these deposits might occur. So we know that, for example, the TDEM technology we're using, that goes down to a depth of investigation of about 700 meters. If the deposits are below that, well, the chances are we're not going to find them. But until we actually look, we won't know. So I think if you really want to understand exactly what the KSZ is, how big an opportunity this is, and why it's such an opportunity, this document presents you with that chance.
Okay, excellent. Well, hopefully shareholders can find time to have a read through that. I did notice a comment in the RNS that you said the main questions to answer now are where and at what depth. So, how does this, what's Kavango's strategy now then? Because to say where and at what depth sounds like, obviously, isn't it?
It is obviously, but that's sort of like the main strategic objective. The question then is, well, how do you go about doing it?
Yeah.
So I've brought up this slide from our IOCG presentation, which you probably remember, Mark. So this is a slice of CSAMT. Now, CSAMT is a technology that we have used in the past, but it's really only been over the last 7-8 months that we've really got to grips with this technology. And what's very exciting about it is that what CSAMT does is it enables you to map stratigraphy, so rock layers, to quite deep depths. Now, with the inversion software that we're using today, what we have at what we now have the ability to do is to map the rock layers, because we're taking this high frequency data. We can map the rock layers down to about 500 meters, 600 meters with quite a high degree of accuracy. Now, the reason that's very important, in particular for the PGE exploration, but it will also be significant for the nickel copper sulfide, is that we can blitz the region with CSAMT now. It's relatively low cost. Hillary's company owns the equipment that we need. We then have to spend some money on the inversion, but it's a really relatively low cost technique and we get a lot of coverage to map the areas, according to Richard's report, where we're most likely to find these types of deposits. So structure in all of this is really important, what's called morphology. So you're looking for the right sort of structure, because this is the areas where you can find these traps where sulfide deposits could have accumulated. So we're now going to be focusing much more on CSAMT. Up in the north, what we're also going to be focusing, of course, on is looking for the high-speed conductors using the TDEM technology. So we've already identified that cluster of 3 targets up in KSZ North, which obviously shareholders are extremely familiar with, the B conductors. So I'm just putting up the image here. What we now need to do across the KSZ is, because we've covered only a small part of this region, we've done 12 of these surveys so far, which are sort of concentrated up here, we're going to be doing a much more extensive reconnaissance campaign with TDEM as well. Jeremy Brett has put together some wonderful innovations in terms of how we can get more bang for our buck, how we can cover more ground more cheaply. So each reconnaissance survey is now costing us about $9,000. So that's really come down in cost. And it means, again, now that we've got confidence, we're using the right technologies, we've demonstrated that. You know, we've had this now verified independently. We know that we've got the right, rather than sort of guessing, we now know that we have the right system to go for. If we can start finding conductors targets up in the north at the right layer, at the right levels, according to where sort of in particular where the Karoo sits, then obviously we've got very high priority drill targets. So this is now, you know, it's for us to open up the throttle on this project. Ideally, obviously, we want to bring in a partner with much deeper pockets who can really fund a lot of this. And really, I think in this market, you know, with nickel doing what it's doing, with the outlook for the green revolution, the demands that there will be for nickel and copper in particular, I think we've got a pretty compelling story to tell to people. And obviously, it's too early to make any guarantees, but we're going to be putting a lot of effort over the coming months in trying to bring a JV partner on board.
Okay. So some CSMAT surveys, TDEM recon as well to identify priority drilling targets, but also actively looking for bringing in a partner. How likely do you think that is, Ben?
It's likely enough that I'm going to be spending most of my time on it. I mean, let's put it that way. From my point of view, the technical guys have got to be getting on with their job. And what I would just add to that, Mark, as well, is we do have these 3 targets around the B conductors. Those, they're not quite drill ready. We're doing a bit more work on those. So one of the things that Richard's going to be following up with, when he's unfortunately not going to be available now for another month, he's going to be off on another project, but he's going to be coming back and doing a deeper review of our geophysical data as well. So there'll be a follow-up report from Richard. But we've got a bit more work to do on these, but these, to all intents and purposes, should be drill ready a little bit later this year. And then I think, based on everything that we've seen so far, one of my big concerns about drilling these conductor targets was that if we drill these and they turn out not to be nickel copper sulfide, they turn out to be something else, we could risk killing the project. Now that we've got Richard's report and we know about the prospectivity of the region, I actually think we can take this chance much sooner. So obviously this is a discussion the board's going to have. We're going to have to look at our strategy. We have to look at funding that's available to us. We'll have to look at rig availability as well. I mean, that's the other challenge in this space. We've got a great relationship with Equity Drilling, Mindea, but obviously they're very busy because, you know, they are, you know, such a good firm. But really, it's I think we are actually now closer to drilling these targets than we were before, and that's another aspect of this report because it's shown the prospectivity of the region. We've now got that proof.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources, again for your time, giving a very detailed presentation there, just looking into the report that was commissioned, and hopefully, shareholders can find the time to have a read through. But you've summarised it very well and what it means for Kavango and the plans going forward. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.